Hi everyone, and welcome back to Raising the Bar. I'm Emilia.
I'm Tia.
And I'm Shaynna.
And today we're going to tackle something that sounds boring on paper, but is actually at the center of how the UK runs, the Constitution.
Before we get into it, let's just clear up what we mean by the Constitution.
Yeah, a constitution is basically the rules about how a country is governed, who has power, how laws are made, and what rights people have. Most countries write theirs down in one big document.
Like the US, their constitution was written in 1787, and they still use it today. It sets out everything from how the president is elected to freedom of speech.
But the UK doesn't have one single document. Ours is what people call an unwritten constitution, although, to be fair, a lot of it is written, just scattered across loads of different sources.
So what actually makes up the UK constitution? There are a few key parts.
So first, there's statute law, which are basically laws which are passed by Parliament, which is the legislative branch of power. For example, the Human Rights Act of 1998 brought the European Convention on Human Rights into UK law, which is now part of the Constitution.
Then there's common law. That's law made by judges through court decisions. Over time, these decisions set precedents that become part of the Constitution.
There are also historic documents, like the Magna Carta from 1215, which first put limits on the king's power, and the Bill of Rights from 1689, which established that Parliament has power over the monarchy.
And then there are conventions, which aren't written down anywhere official, but are followed because that's just the way it's always been done. Like the Prime Minister always being from the House of Commons, not the Lords.
Finally, you've got works of authority, basically old books written by legal experts that are sometimes used to explain how things should work.
So when we say unwritten, what we really mean is uncodified. It's not all in one single document, but spread across these sources.
And that makes the UK really unusual. Almost every other democracy has a codified constitution, but we're actually the only nation with Israel who has an unwritten constitution.
Which raises the question, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Let's start with the positives.
So number one, flexibility. Because the UK constitution isn't locked into one document, it can change easily. Parliament can pass a law, and just like that, the constitution will adapt.
Yeah, compare that to the US. If they want to change their constitution, it's a massive deal. They need 2/3 of the Congress and 3/4 of the state to agree. That's why they've only had 27 amendments in over 200 years.
The UK, on the other hand, can react quickly. Like after 9/11, Parliament passed new anti-terrorism laws fast. That kind of speed would be harder under a rigid, written constitution.
Second of all, tradition and continuity. The UK system has grown gradually over centuries, and that gives people trust in it. It's not like one group suddenly sat down and invented all the rules.
And third, parliamentary sovereignty. That means Parliament is the highest authority. It can make or change any law. Some people say that's a strength because it gives the elected representatives maximum power.
But of course, there are some big problems with this system.
The first is simply uncertainty. Because the constitution is spread out and partly based on unwritten traditions, it's not always clear what the rules really are.
Yeah, like in 2019 when Prime Minister Boris Johnson tried to prorogue or suspend Parliament during the Brexit crisis. It went all the way to the Supreme Court and the judges ruled it as unlawful. That case showed how vague some of the rules really are.
Second, there's the issue of too much power in Parliament. Because Parliament is sovereign, there aren't many checks on what it can do. A government with a big majority can pretty much push through anything.
And third, rights are not fully protected. Unlike in the US, where people can point to their constitutional rights, in the UK, rights can be changed by a simple act of Parliament. For example, the government could technically simply repeal the Human Rights Act.
So the big debate is, should we move to a written constitution?
The arguments for it are pretty strong. It would make everything clear, set limits on government power, and give people a document to point to when defending their rights.
But on the other hand, writing one down could actually cause more problems. Like, who would decide what goes in it? Would it be based on tradition or rewritten from scratch? And once it's written, it's much harder to change, which means it might not keep up with modern life.
Also, the UK system has worked for centuries. Some people say, if it's not broken, why fix it?
Let's throw in a few more examples, because this is where the Constitution gets interesting.
One example of this is evolution. The creation of the Scottish Parliament and Welsh Senate in the late 1990s was a massive constitutional change, and it happened through regular acts of Parliament, not a huge rewrite of the whole system.
Another example is the House of Lords reform in 1999, when most hereditary peers lost their automatic seats. Again, Parliament just passed a law, and boom, the constitution was updated.
Another example is Brexit. Leaving the EU completely changed the UK's constitutional landscape, especially because EU law used to take priority over UK law. The whole process showed how flexible, but also how chaotic our system can be.
So I guess to sum up, the UK's constitution is unique, it's flexible, and based on history and tradition, and really can change quickly when needed, which a lot of other constitutions can't. So what would you guys think?
I think a written constitution would have a lot of trouble keeping up to date with like the modern changes. So I feel like it also has its downsides, but it also has a lot of upsides. Like maybe it's much more difficult to, I guess, like corrupt a constitution if it's written down, because like people have to like obviously apply the constitution, and I just feel like it kind of reinforces people's rights more when it's written down, but also has a lot of downsides.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, even though like I see the advantages of having a written constitution, I think the UK constitution should stay unwritten because of the flexibility. And even though this does like allow potential for tyranny, because there's quite like a very clear separation of powers in the UK, I think it's like an unwritten constitution works with that.
I agree. Also, I think when you look at countries such as like America, like there are like constitutions written like the 18th century, like after the Civil War and their independence, and like for example, they're like their Second Amendment, which is like the right to bear arms. Like obviously, when that constitution was written, all these rights that they wanted to do and give the American people, like were coming out of an age of like after had been in war and they hadn't been united, and like the right to bear arms in the 18th century had a very different meaning than it does now in America. So I think like there's some constitution which do not like align with like societal change at all. So I think that like for example I like that the UK constitution can adjust, like if something bad happened they can like make new rules and make new changes in their like documents, whatever that is, whether that's through like statute law or common law. So I think even though there's a risk of tyranny in the UK constitution, I think that like the powers are spread evenly and that it goes along well with societal change.
Yeah, I just feel like an unwritten constitution is much more adaptable to like the modern
Which I think is
society.
needed, yeah.
Another one of the points was like how after 9/11, because the UK has an unwritten constitution, they were able to like create new anti-terrorism law. I think that's very important because if you look at the US with its right to bear arms, you'll see that like even after all the school shootings and like the public shootings, they still haven't like been able to like actually like act on gun violence because it's in the constitution. But like that wouldn't happen if the constitution was unwritten and could be easily changed. So that's another benefit of having an unwritten constitution.
Yeah, I completely agree. Also, it's like really hard. Like for example, in the US, there's like different like rights per state. So like for gun rights, like even though they have that amendment, like for example, some like states like New York, like guns are illegal, but like gun violence is such a big issue that like really that in Europe is not as big like whatsoever. So I think that the US, despite its like some good aspects of its democracy and stuff, like it really shows how like an entrenched constitution can really like can bring damage.
I mean, so like, would you guys rather, since we like all live in the UK now, would you rather the UK have a constitution like America or keep what it has right now?
Keep what it has.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you all for listening.
Thank you, everyone. We'll see you for next week's episode.